Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and that sometimes messy thing we call life. This podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com. All right, I am here with, I would say, a relatively new friend of mine. We've known each other for a little bit, Tasha.
A little bit, yeah.
Through the local photographers group. First of all, I have to set the scene here because I am here with Tasha Koetsch, and I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, yes?
Okay. Yeah, it's a weird one, but it's really easy to say.
We were just reviewing this before we got started, but we are actually in your home studio, and you've been giving me kind of a tour of the studio space, and we're going to get into kind of how you use the space in a little bit more detail here in a bit. But I rarely get the opportunity to do an interview in person. I'm lucky enough to get a chance to connect with you through our local photographers group here in Chattanooga. Yes. And you were kind enough to be willing to do a podcast interview, and we actually get to do it in person.
Oh, I'm honored to be able to do it, definitely. And I'm very excited to do it in person. When I found out that you run Photographers Edit originally, I was like, wow, this is something that I listened to that I didn't realize was local to me. So this is a great opportunity. It's real wonderful. Well,
we're going to talk about something. We've talked a little bit about boudoir photography here, or boudoir photography here on the podcast.
I call it boudoir. Don't worry about that R. I'm not hoity-toity about it. Most of my clients can't even pronounce it at all. So I'm just like, this is an intimate session, a storytelling session for you, a portrait session for you. Not so much boudoir or boudoir. I feel like boudoir just kind of brings to mind the old glamour 80s kind of.
80s, okay.
Yeah, that 80s, 90s feel of glamour with the look over the shoulder, and it's just it's a little bit dated. We're slowly taking back the term boudoir, but yeah, it definitely lacks about the how to say it, honestly.
Okay, so we'll go with boudoir.
Yeah, easiest for you.
And you mentioned storytelling, because that's actually what we're going to focus on today. It's a different angle on this topic that we haven't covered at the podcast before, so we're going to get to that here in just a little bit. But we normally start off the podcast with a question about brand position.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting one because, I mean, even in Chattanooga, we have a relatively small market here, and yet there are so many photographers. And so the question is, how do we set ourselves apart from, whether it's a Chattanooga market or a big city market, how do we set ourselves apart? What is the brand position? So how would you characterize your brand position? What's the thing that makes you distinct from other boudoir photographers in the area?
You know what's hilarious? I had a completely different answer for this until you brought in just like how to make us different from other photographers, because that just brings it right into storytelling. That is almost exactly what I was going to say for later as well, was, you know, when you have so many different photographers in an area and how it, especially nowadays, how it's so easy to become a professional photographer. I say with, you know, the little air quotes. I know you guys can't see that, but it's so easy to become a photographer nowadays. You have to differentiate yourself. And I feel like the way that I do it and what makes me unique is the fact that I pull storytelling into it. And I'm lovingly redefining beauty. Like, that's when I first started, I created this hashtag for myself that kind of summed up what I felt I wanted to do with my business, and that's redefine beauty. Because I know when I was growing up as a kid, I had such body issues, and all the way up through adulthood, even recently, I've had a lot of body issues. And I know from my clients, I mean, their stories and what they've been through and what they go through and what we go through in our sessions has changed my life and my perceptions of them and of beauty itself. I feel like they've changed me, and I've hopefully changed them by the end of their session. And that's what I feel like my brand is it's, you know, redefining beauty, doing it through storytelling, through, you know, really creating that personal session that brings it out of my clients.
Well, and there's actually a quote. It's actually from your website. It says, "Warning, a boudoir session with the Wanderlust studio," which is the name of your business, by the way, "may cause spontaneous bouts of sexy confidence."
Yes.
Which is a pretty great summation of what you just described.
Yep.
I know that, and I've alluded to this, I think, on the podcast before, it's not just women either that struggle with body image issues or insecurities regarding how they look, and creating an atmosphere and environment where you can help somebody feel comfortable with himself, first of all, is just, it's paramount for any type of photographer that is working with a human being, right? But then you come into a boudoir session like this, and it takes it to a whole different level. So for you to be able to do that, and then not only that, help him feel comfortable enough to tell a story, which is a concept I'm not really familiar with when it comes to boudoir photography. Again, we're going to touch on that in just a bit, is really great. Yeah. So I think that focus, storytelling, I think is really it does help set you apart, but the emphasis on helping them feel comfortable enables that, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And that's honestly what everyone lacks coming in here. Everyone who comes through my studio, men, women, everyone, none of them feel 100% about themselves.
Yeah, you said earlier, we were chatting before we started recording, and you were referencing somebody who said that they wanted to lose that, quote, last 30 pounds before they came in and got photographed.
30 pounds.
Yeah.
Oh, it really doesn't. That last 30 pounds really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I've had people of all sizes come in, and it's all about that confidence and building that up. And that's what I try to do, is build up that confidence for them and with them so that they can have an amazing experience.
Well, and by the way, for those of you who are listening in or curious what Tasha's work looks like, you're going to want to go to her website. First of all, it's wanderlustboudoirstudio.com. We'll link to this in the show notes. For those of you listening in, if you don't take advantage of the show notes, it's Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com. And then Instagram, Wanderlust_boudoir on Instagram. You can check out Tasha's work. But let's talk a little bit about business advice.
Yeah.
How long have you been in business?
Like my own studio, about 3 to 4 years now.
Okay.
Before that I worked for other commercial studios. So
you have quite a bit of experience as a photographer, relatively new sole proprietor, shall we say, or individual business owner. And so I'm curious, in that time frame, because you've built something up pretty great already in that relatively short amount of time, what's one of the most important lessons that you've learned? Or put another way, what would be, if you had like 15 seconds in an elevator and you had to give advice to a fellow photographer, what would that thing be?
Network, build your community. Straight out the gate, build your community. Especially for artistic creatives such as ourselves, it can get really lonely. It can get super lonely.
Yeah, you talked about working from home.
Yeah, working from home. So I edit, I do all of my marketing, I do all of my business planning, I do everything from home. And so not being able to get out much and everything, you kind of get sucked into that vortex of just becoming such an introvert and a little bit of a hermit.
Yeah.
And so you really need to create those and cultivate those connections that you can make in our community, in the creative community. We were talking about earlier, we have our little weekly photography group meetings, which I love. I adore those meetings. They get me out of the house.
And you show up very consistently.
I do. I really need those meetings every week. I really do. But it's not even just for friendship's sake, just having that connection with people. It's being able to bounce off ideas. It's being able to learn from them because they've had different experiences. They have different, you can learn from their different sides of business because it's not just our photography community. It's also, the other creative artists in the community because they can have something completely different, a different point of view than you. And you can really learn from that.
You prioritize going to workshops quite a bit, it seems.
Yes. So I do travel quite a bit, and whenever I can, I love learning from other photographers, especially with those that have a little bit of a different style as mine. I recently had my own session actually with Alex Shaurlau, who is an amazing photographer. I'm probably butchering his last name too. I really need to ask him specifically how he pronounces his last name because it's a hard one too. But he's a UK photographer. We were both in Vegas at the time for WPPI. But I paid to have a boudoir session with him to learn from him specifically. And then of course to have my own amazing boudoir session. But he had a completely different style than mine at the time. And I actually, from what I learned from him, he's very cinematic. He utilizes ambient lighting, darker tone lighting, and really tells a story. Back to the storytelling. He really tells a story in his photography, and it's just amazing the way that he does this. And I've taken what I've learned from him and from other photographers and built it into my own work to create my own style and develop my own style. And I love doing that. I love learning from other photographers.
Well, like you said earlier, it is important to have that community, but the perspective that you gain from exposure to other perspectives is absolutely wonderful. Yeah, I can't stress that enough. And by the way, for those of you who feel like you're too busy Tasha's pretty busy, and she just makes time. She just shows up, and I love that. And all we have to do is put it in our calendar and commit to it. It's not so complicated. I think
schedules are a girl's best friend.
It's everybody's best friend.
Yeah, it's everybody's best friend. It really is.
So speaking of though, time, free time, creating time. That's something we talk a lot about on the podcast, and how to go about doing that ultimately, right? Because I mean, we might love running our businesses, and that's great, but there's more to life than just running a business. So
most definitely.
What's something that you do, even if it's just little pieces of time here and there, what's something that you do in your week-to-week workflow that enables you to have a little bit of that time?
So on the inside, I'm laughing right now because scheduling.
Okay.
Seriously. The only way I can put in free time is to schedule it in. A lot of times when thankfully right now it's not too busy. It will be in a few weeks, but when it's super, super busy, I have to schedule in showers. Like you schedule in 15-minute, like go for a walk. Go read, 15 minutes, read a book, and I actually schedule in free time with my work because otherwise I get too caught up with what I'm doing at that time, like whether it be editing or blogging or scheduling social media posts. Social media especially, 75% of my job I find is social media.
Really?
Honestly, cultivating those relationships because it's about that community again. It's not just, professionally on the business side of things, and personally with friendships, with that whole community. It's also with Boudoir, I find it's so much better and so much easier when you have already a community to draw from and to build a rapport and to get to know, and they can get to know you. And I have a private girls group on Facebook that I run that's all about empowering women. It's a safe space for women to come in and ask questions, about health, relationships, sex, boudoir, lingerie, clothing, anything really. And it's that safe space and it's that community again to draw from. I find that's the way to do it, just to have that community because they can get to know you and you can get to know them.
But you've got to segment your week so that you have time for that kind of thing. So
that's the thing, you've got to segment it. It takes so much time because you've got to post, and then with Facebook and social media, it's really hard nowadays, especially with all the algorithms and all of that. You've got to be active in your groups and you've got to be there and reply to every single comment. And I mean, not just for the algorithm, but also to help the girls get to know you and of course be authentic, with the girls.
Are you using a particular app though to break your week up, to create those time blocks or whatever it is?
I'm old school. I use Google Calendar.
That's great.
So old school, but I mean, it's definitely, it helps because I can literally just block out everything. That in like an Excel spreadsheet, something like that. Google Calendar is definitely my friend though.
Well, the thing about Google Calendar that I've found is particularly helpful too is it's easy to share. Like people can be on other platforms, but it's easy to share a Google Calendar with somebody, easily accessible any and everywhere. And that's really helpful. I've also, and I mentioned this on the podcast before, but I use Calendly.
Yes, yeah.
To schedule. In fact, when we scheduled our podcast interview, I sent you a link to my Calendly calendar, and that ties into Google Calendar and knows my availability and enables people to schedule appointments. So it works out really well. But Google Calendar is the bomb. But you have to actually use it, number one. And I think beyond that, you have to actually commit to it. There are a lot of people that don't. They put something in there, or they look at their calendar, but they're not willing to
actually
put that thing in there and take up that space. I'm like, just commit. It's not a big deal. You could do it. No, that's good. That's really important. Talk to me about business learning.
Yeah.
Whether it's business books or maybe audiobooks or podcasts or anything else. Yeah. How do you go about getting your inspiration and your education?
Yeah. So what I usually do, I gravitate more towards like online tutorials in different forums and communities online. Things like Creative Live. Kelby One was a big one for me when I first started out, especially with building the business, because he has Scott Kelby. He's a photographer, an amazing photographer. If you don't know him, his platform has a lot of variety of different learning, especially if you're beginning into photography and all of that. So in the beginning, he was really helpful. And then
he's been around for a while.
Oh, he's moved on. He's been for a while. Yeah, definitely. He's one of the old school photographers that you just like automatically gravitate towards. Him and Joe McNally.
Okay.
Like those two are hand in hand who you go to learn, especially for lighting. Especially for lighting. But yeah, and after I kind of had grown past what I needed from there, then I went on to more specific, especially when I actually specialized in boudoir. I went towards more the boudoir communities. The Association of International Boudoir Photographers, they have a great tutorial list of things that you can listen to, kind of podcast style.
Okay.
And then the Do More Forum, Do More Wear Less, which is a huge boudoir platform. They're a great community to learn from, not just from the forum itself, but from just the private groups that they have, like on Facebook. They are great to learn from, have a whole list of tutorials, things like that. Podcasts like your podcasts are ones to definitely listen to. I love the last one with Matt. That was amazing.
Did you love that?
I loved that. That's just like listening to that, I was just like, oh man.
I was actually listening to a segment of it this morning, and it was inspiring just to...
It's so inspiring.
The first 20, 25 minutes, the back and forth talking about mentality, how to approach not just business, but life in general.
No, definitely.
For those of you who are curious, if you haven't heard episode 268 with Matt Matthews, you're definitely going to want to hear that.
It's definitely worth it.
Oh, man. And like the wonderful, wonderful energy he brings to the conversation is awesome, too.
He is so much fun.
Oh, it's so good.
He's so much fun. I'm also in his group, actually.
Are you really?
Yeah. It's like he also has a learning platform that is amazing.
He's got a lot to offer, for sure. Photography. So let's talk about something unusual in your camera bag. This has been a favorite question.
This has been a favorite question of ours.
This doesn't have to be a lens. It doesn't have to be a camera. It doesn't have to be a flash. It could be something totally random. But what is something that you utilize that enables you to be a better photographer?
Yeah. I've been experimenting lately with creating different depths of field and utilizing different depths of field and creating an environment in my portraits where it's almost like I'm shooting behind something or shooting through something or kind of peeking into my client's sessions, that kind of feel to the portrait. And so I've gravitated lately towards shooting through things like copper pipes you can shoot through.
That was the most random one. You showed me this the other day at one of the Chattanooga photography get-togethers, and it wasn't something that I would have guessed you would shoot through.
Oh, and it's something that you can just get from like Home Depot. Just like when I got it, they would cut it for you, but now you got to get a big pipe and you have to cut it yourself, and you have to get like the cutting thing. They apparently had too many people cutting and then returning.
Okay.
They just ruin it for the rest of us. But I'm sure you can also get them online and all that. But finding things that really, you don't have to spend a lot of money on them at all. You literally just pick them up at antiques, shops and vintage shops that, you just randomly find. I was talking earlier.
Yeah, you were showing me. So, and for those of you who don't get the visual, talk to me a little bit about this piece that you were showing me earlier, because you were doing a little show and tell. Yeah,
so I just found this piece that I'm not 100% sure what it is, but it seems to be kind of a stained glass tea candle holder.
Yeah, it looks like that.
Yeah, and so you put a tea candle in it and it would light up the stained glass really nicely. Well, it's in this little flower formation and it has a lot of openings in it where you can shoot through, or you can just utilize the glass to kind of fill in dead space in your portrait if you're shooting into light, because it'll come through and it'll just create these beautiful jewel tones. And so things like that, I think I got this for like $1. It's all dusty now. I haven't cleaned it or anything. It's from an antique mall.
And it was from an antique store?
Yeah, okay. It was probably like $1 or $2. It wasn't even that much. And then things like that, the copper pipe. I
actually have a post here that I pulled up from May 27th. Again, for those of you listening in, if you want to check this out on Instagram, it's Wanderlust_boudoir. Or boudoir, whichever you prefer.
Whichever you prefer.
But May 27th, this looks like you shot through something. Is that right? It's a black and white image?
That's the black and white image of what I showed you earlier. That's shooting through a strand of little battery-operated lights that are shaped like stars.
Yeah.
I picked them up during Christmas season, so I think they were super cheap on sale. But they're just those little battery-operated ones that you would kind of put maybe in front of your computer, like a college girl would put it, in front of her computer.
My kids put them in their room,
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those where it's just like this cheap and easy thing that you never really thought of, but you can really utilize to be really creative.
So really you're using these objects to kind of emphasize depth of field, to fill in dead space,
to
frame
space a little bit,
subjects a little bit. This is it. It's an interesting. I mean, it's a creative idea, and had I been that cool a photographer back when I was shooting weddings, this would have been a really cool way to go about.
Oh, that's how I started it. Actually,
Really?
was in weddings. I think I had seen a ring of fire shot, which is that copper pipe. I had seen a ring of fire shot, and it was while I was doing weddings, and that's how I kind of got into it.
Okay.
Was utilizing it then, and I didn't really fully get into it and start utilizing it, I think, till Boudoir, though, because for weddings you don't have time to carry all that stuff. You really don't. Here I can have them all laid out, and I have time to think, oh, it'd be cool shot through this.
But it's subtle too. It's not over the top. It doesn't feel like it's
you don't want to take away
intrusive.
from the photos. See, that's the thing. It's a fine line. You really don't want to. You want to use them to emphasize what you're looking at, what you want the eye to see.
Yeah.
Rather than taking away and making it too busy. Like that's one thing you don't want to do.
Yeah, I'm looking at September 30th, 2018. So I scrolled back a little ways, and this is a beautiful image.
Yeah.
This portrait. But what are you framing her with there?
It's a little chandelier light. Oh, there's a specific name for them, and I can't remember it.
It
But
basically looks like a glass bowl.
yeah, it looks like a cigar, a glass cigar bowl, you
Yep,
know? But there's a hole in the bottom.
Because it was part of a chandelier.
It was around a light and a chandelier, and a big chandelier. This one's the biggest one I've ever found.
Okay.
Yeah, and usually they're itty bitty ones, very light, but still very usable. This one's the heaviest one I found, the heaviest and biggest. But I got it specifically because of all the different facets in these crystals right here.
You'll have to look at this again, September 30th, 2018, and that's at Wanderlust_Boudoir, so you can see an example of this. But it's beautiful, and it's subtle, and yet it's not. But it really doesn't get in the way of the image, and I think it's really beautifully done. So this is a great little tip for those of you curious. Start shooting through things or around things. Using some random object that might be around you, you can use that to frame an image. It's a really, really great idea. I want to experiment with it more now.
Oh, it's super fun. It's super fun getting a little bit creative with them.
So boudoir photography, it's become particularly popular actually in the last, just from my observation, maybe in the last 2 or 3 years in particular, maybe a little bit more, maybe the last 5.
Probably about the last 5 years. It's really grown and become more popular, yeah.
And not just with individuals, but with couples as well. But when you brought up this idea of storytelling boudoir photography, I don't know that I'd ever heard of a boudoir photographer referencing their boudoir work in that way.
Yeah.
It's kind of a different thing. Is there a particular reason that you care about the story side of the genre?
Well, again, it kind of goes, I think when I first started seeing my photo sessions as more storytelling, as like telling a story, I think it was actually back when I worked for Disney. I loved capturing the moments.
And were you shooting weddings for Disney?
I did both. Sorry.
Not boudoir for Disney?
No, not boudoir. There actually was. I assisted on one boudoir
really
shoot, and that was pretty awesome. But yeah, there actually was boudoir at Disney in the hotel.
I was going to say, that's the possibilities are endless.
The entire time I worked there, the one that happened. But no, I worked in the parks first as PhotoPass, because that's what I got in through the college program.
Okay.
Which was amazing, an amazing
I've heard it's amazing.
Oh, it's great opportunity. Disney ruined me for other companies. That's why I built my own.
Yeah.
Really, really did ruin me for others, because they are an amazing company. But no, I got in through there, and then when I graduated, I went back for one more semester, I think, in the college program, and then got graduated to professional internship and went on from there into the wedding photography, DFAP, Disney Fine Art Photography Group. They're the ones that do all the weddings and all of that.
How many, were you working in Florida, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
How many photographers did they have just for weddings, do you know?
Total, well, because they're contract hires, so they would come in at different times of the week. But I think total we had 3 people there that were there constantly in our photography room, like editing and doing albums and things like that. Well, there were 2 others doing albums as well. But then photographers themselves, probably around no more than 20 at any time. Yeah, it wasn't because we would do weddings for Disney are a lot different than regular weddings. There would be many in a day, but they would also be only like 1 to 2 hours. There'd be a few big ones, like the big 8 to 10 hour ones, but they're kind of few and far between, because most people who come down to get married for Disney, if they're not doing it all out, they're just doing the little, like, let's get married and then go have fun in the parks,
right?
You know,
right?
So there'd be a lot of so the photographers would do multiple weddings in a day, so we didn't need to have 50 or 100 photographers. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So, but the storytelling element, did you get inspiration from being at Disney?
Yeah. So specifically, funnily enough, when it was when I first started in PhotoPass, not even when I was doing portraits or anything like that, there was something so much different because you'd get the portrait in front of the castle and all of that, and those are great. Those are great to hang up on the wall. Those are the staples that you always want to get as a family. But they started this thing with more creative shots down at Disney. And then also they kind of pushed you to be a little bit more creative when it wasn't too busy, have fun with the guests and everything. And I would end up, especially in my first time there, my first time working there, I worked at Hollywood Studios, which is a little bit more of a laid back park. Mm-hmm. And you had a lot more time to have fun with the guests because there wasn't that much to do there, and so they weren't impatient to get on to the next ride, and so you could do a lot of creative things. And I found that the pictures that they loved, going back to like the viewing store or whatever, the pictures that they loved were the ones where we were running around all over the park and the kids were exploring, like they were peeking out around a vintage car, or they were like playing, and it was these storytelling, more candid moments that really pulled at the heartstrings more than, yes, they had the staples of in front of the big icons, but it was those little moments, and it's the same thing with seeing the characters, with the little kids. You want the whole story of the little girl running up to meet, the princess. So you get that shot of her reaction. You get that shot of her running towards her princess. You have the shot of her hugging the princess. You get the whole experience, the whole story, which made it a lot more poignant, a lot more important to the guests and the clients, I feel, than just that one posed picture.
So initially then that inspiration kind of led to you thinking, I need to add that twist to, like, how did you tie that to boudoir photography? So
I think that's how I really built that into my business as a whole when I first started. Because when I first started, I was doing weddings and portraits and boudoir.
Okay.
But I utilized that kind of mindset, that thinking of creating a story in my portrait sessions and in my wedding sessions. Like I would have a portrait session downtown where I would basically follow them downtown. And I had one where it was in the rain and we're just following them going and dancing through the rain and everything. And it's telling the story rather than just a pretty pose picture, which we got the pretty pose picture of them like kissing and the whole, like World War II D-Day, that whole dip pose. We got that shot with the rain all over. It was beautiful. But you still want the in-between shots, of like, how did they get there? How did they get from one location to the next? What happened in between there? You don't just want those pretty pose shots. You want the in-between meaty stuff too.
The in-between.
Yes,
that's
the
a good way.
In-between.
Well, and actually, so that's a good segue to my next question, which is, help us understand what the word story even means. Because you hear the word story used a lot, but in the context of this conversation, and more specifically the finished product that you're giving to your clients, what does a story look like?
So story, it depends on how we utilize it, because it can mean two different things, story, for my boudoir sessions, honestly. Story can be what the client brings in. Like every client is different, and I try and make sure not to have kind of a cookie cutter session for each client. Every client brings in something different. One will bring in, I literally had a girl bring in a bowling pin before and like bowling ball because her husband was on the team, and the jersey and everything. She brought the jersey, a bowling pin, and a bowling ball because her husband was on the team.
Wow.
And that creates a completely different story than anyone else.
Right.
Yeah. And so we pull that in. We pull in the things that make them as a couple unique, and her as a person, or them as a person, unique. We bring that to the session to create a story.
Would you call it, could you almost call it a theme?
Yeah, no? A theme to the session. Okay. Yeah, and that's really, all of my sessions, they include a style consult as well, so that we can kind of fully delve. Because one person, she might want like a pinup. Her dream boudoir session might be a pinup where, it's a pinup girl in her quite literal boudoir, her secret little, lingerie room, and she's either getting ready for the day or she's undressing from the day. Mm-hmm. And it's that whole story. I can create, like, for one session, I can create a whole story just from one look. One lingerie look, like a full head-to-toe lingerie look, the just black bra and panty set, the garter, the hose, the shoes. You can create a whole storyline just from that look, because you have the whole hair and makeup, the coiffed look, and then you go from being fully clothed, you get the full shot of the room, the environmental shot, that's that kind of scene setting shot. Mm-hmm. And then you go in from there, do different angles, do different perspectives, give them actions. I always give girls actions. I'll put them in a pose. I'll do the pose first, honestly, because they need to see it sometimes first.
Yeah.
And then I'll put them in the pose and I'll give them certain actions of what to do. And that kind of creates a story of like, what's she going to do next? What's she going to do next? And then we slowly take off the clothes, the different elements. We can do a full set of her just unrolling her garters down her leg. Sexiest thing ever. So we take the garter and the hose off and the shoes off, and then she's just in her lingerie set. We can then go topless and just do underwear. Then we can go into implied nudes. And then if she wants to, we can do full nudes. We go the whole gamut. That's an entire session right there, telling a story of just her getting ready for the evening, basically, or getting ready at the end of the night.
So do you kind of pick that in that pre-session consult? Do you pick that so-called theme or story?
Yeah, we talk about kind of what her dream session would be. Would she like it to be, more natural and classy, daytime session, kind of, G-rated or PG-13 kind of rated, not too.
Yeah, we need to at least bump into PG-13.
Yeah, it's like not too crazy. I've had girls where it's more just like a beautiful, glamorous portrait session, which is like a little bit of a sexual flair. That way, it's because sexuality, it runs the gamut.
That's fair.
From that natural sexy
that's a good point.
to the super, super sexy.
A little bit of nuance.
Yeah, and so...
Or a lot of nuance.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of different ways that you can take boudoir, and we definitely utilize them all here. But yeah, definitely, we talk about it during their style consult of what exactly... Because we talk about them as a couple and what they do together, common hobbies, things that they like to do, things that are like little inside stories. I have a story that's probably way too hot for a podcast, so I probably won't say it, but it was such a funny inside story, and it's literally just for them. Has to deal with jalapeno peppers.
Wow.
And she literally brought a jalapeno pepper into the studio, and we shot with that in front of a gold backdrop, and it was so hilarious. Like the little like secret smile. Oh my gosh. Like they still have it hanging on their wall, big metal print of it.
No way.
And oh my gosh, yes. And it looks amazing. And it's just this perfect little inside story between the two of them. So they'll always people will look at it and be like,
What?
Yeah. But for them, it's this perfect little inside story that sums up their quirky relationship. And that to me, a picture, shows 1,000 or says 1,000 words. That to me, just right there, telling that story, it's so much more than just a regular post picture. Do
you feel like you have to kind of go exploring a little bit in that conversation to try to find that thing?
Oh, yes.
And then are you usually the one that you're like, that's the thing we need to run with, or do they usually...
It's a little bit of both. Okay. Sometimes they come in, they're like, I want to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, that's totally fine. Like I have a lot of military wives, police wives, firefighter wives, things like that, where they're like, we're going to utilize this. And I'm like, sure, that's totally fine, because that's them. If there's anything else we can utilize, because usually my sessions themselves, they can go anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. So we have time. So we have time to utilize and pursue different little avenues.
That's a long session.
It is a long session. It includes hair and makeup and styling and all of that. So it is definitely a long session, because for boudoir, for me, it's not, you can't just do it in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
For someone to loosen up and to be able to really get into it, and to really get out there. I mean, we start the day after hair and makeup. We start out with exercise stretching and a little bit of dancing, just to loosen up. Okay. And that's something that you don't usually do in an hour session, something like that. It takes a little bit of time to draw some girls out of their shell. Some girls, I will totally get their session done within an hour. And I'm like, okay, what else should we do? Because we have everything. Wow. And that's why I say up to 3 hours.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it'll go really fast and we'll just get it done like that. But then sometimes it takes a little bit to kind of draw it out and to get that inner beauty kind of shining,
Yeah.
Because sometimes, and again, going with storytelling, the one thing I don't like about those posed pictures is sometimes you kind of get dead behind the eyes.
Yes.
After so much posing, the girls just kind of go blank face. Yep. And so that in itself, I'm like, I much rather have a story and tell them and give them actions and tell them what to do.
You talk about the significance of story versus just the so-called portraits. Have you ever shot just I'm going to put in air quotes here, regular portrait session, boudoir portrait session, and seeing a client's response in that context versus the way that they respond to that story?
Probably more in my beginning years. I was more like before I even, because I did a few boudoir sessions back in college just for just for shits and giggles, and that was more like, okay, pose, okay, pose, okay, pose, and they were great. I mean, the clients loved them, but it was more like, I don't know, it was kind of almost indifferent a little bit. They were beautiful pictures and everything, but they didn't really connect to them because it's just a pose. It's not coming from anything with feeling. It's not coming with it from anything with purpose of like, why is she posed that way? It's like, why does she have her legs in the air like that?
Right.
You know, it's like, how did she get to be that way?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like I said, it's all about the in-between. It's all about the adventure rather than the end, you know?
Yes.
It's all about the in-between.
That's a great way to sum that up.
Yeah.
Well, so let's give our listeners a little bit more context. Walk us through, I mean, you talked about the consult. How long does a consult usually last?
Yeah, so a consult can go from like 30 minutes usually to an hour, depending, especially if we're looking through different sets and different costumes. I have a whole client closet full of lingerie and different items, so that can take a little bit to go through.
I have to ask you this question.
Yeah.
I'm not a boudoir photographer. Is there ever any apprehension? Somebody comes in and they're looking at this clothing that other people have worn and they're like, I don't know about that.
So I talked to them about it in their style consult, and I've never had an issue. What the thing is, you have to think of it, for one, I clean everything in between, obviously. But it's a lot like trying on bathing suits in the store. It's actually a lot better than trying on bathing suits in the store because I'm pretty sure they don't wash those in between. But I asked my girls specifically, like, they don't need to bring anything because I have enough of a client closet that they can do their entire session with things from my client closet. So they don't need to go out and purchase all the lingerie they want or need or think they need. But I do recommend that they at least bring a black and a nude thong to wear underneath my things.
Yep.
That way, in case they do choose to wear any of those things, they're wearing something underneath.
And they don't
just
have to
like
feel
changing.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just like changing into a swimsuit in the store. And then I clean everything in between.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Haven't had any issues, thankfully.
That was just something I was even thinking about recently. I'm like, I don't know about that.
That's a
whole,
question that people get, though, in a lot of the
bet.
different groups. They're, when boudoir photographers are asking about client closets, they're like, how in the world do you guys do it? And you just got to think about it in a certain way where it's like, oh, yeah, we change into bathing suits in the stores, and like they want you to wear your underwear for a reason. So that's the same principle.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thanks for the clarification.
There you go.
So consultation, 30 minutes to an hour. You have context. You go with it. You pick a theme, a story that the session's going to be based around. The client gets here for a session. Will you just kind of walk us through step by step what that looks like and how ultimately you're constructing that session to tell that story?
Yeah. So what we do is they get in and we first go through everything that they brought, because sometimes it's changed between the style consult and the session, because sometimes they'll have their style consult months in advance.
Oh, wow.
I always tell them, because they do book me quite early, in advance sometimes. I don't get too many last minute bookings. And so it can be months apart. I try to get their consult a little bit before their session, not too far. But if they're wanting it, super fast and right away, we totally do that as well. So we go through what they bring first off during the day. And because I tell my clients, bring everything, just in case, because you never know what might spark that creative, thinking or that idea that just makes it work. The other day, I had a session actually where it was such a last minute addition. We ended up doing some implied nude and then just using the tons of pearls that I have. And it ended up being both of our favorite parts of the session, just the pearls. But we'll go through all of what they brought and we'll pick out kind of what we're thinking of. You always want to have things that kind of that make sense together, that tell that story. So that's how we choose outfits. We'll go through hers and then we'll go through my client closet to see if there's anything from there that they'd like to utilize. Again, kind of still in the same realm. Like, you don't want something that's like fire engine red and then the next look be yellow and the next look be, the romantic nude. It's like how do we get from there to there to there?
Well, doesn't the story generally help guide that, though?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so that's what we're kind of picking and choosing, which we want to utilize and how we want to shape it.
Okay.
Because she can come in and she can have that full, garter belt look with the lingerie, and then she could also bring in jersey that, her husband loves, her favorite, her husband's favorite jersey. But we'll utilize that in the story. So what we'll do is, depending on which they would prefer, and that's more album design wise afterwards, the way we would shoot it is we would actually shoot the total glam look first, merely because after hair and makeup is the best you're going to look, because after a while you're just going to have bedhead hair and rumpled lipstick and all of that, because you're going everywhere in the boudoir studio.
And by the way, you mentioned, I think you just said the word bed, but I was thinking about this bed that's over here in your studio. I'm
huge
looking
monster.
Yeah. So for those of you who are listening in, we're trying to paint a picture here. It is one of the coolest beds I've ever seen in person. Honestly, this massive circular thing, this velvet, kind of plush velvet cover or blue cover on it. Incredible headboard. Pillows all around. I mean, it's quite the sight to behold.
It's a luxury right there.
Yeah.
It's definitely a luxurious bed.
It's pretty amazing. So when we're talking about shooting in that scenario, that's what your clients get to come into.
Yeah. They'll either get to come into that, and a lot of it is, again, pre-planning, and because if they have what they're bringing in is completely different, then we'll utilize a different space.
Okay.
Or we'll even redecorate the space.
Fair enough. Yeah, because that wouldn't work for every session, obviously.
That would not work for every session.
Right.
That is a very, luxurious session right
It's pretty
there.
incredible, but you've got this amazing natural light coming through the window right next to it that's so soft and perfect. It's really, really incredible. But I didn't mean to take us off track. So they come in, you're reviewing wardrobe, basically.
Yeah, we go through our wardrobe real quick. Yeah. Basically, we're just finalizing.
Okay.
We're like, okay, plan's still the same, or okay, we're going in a little bit of a different direction. And a lot of that is just on the fly creativity. You see something and you're just like, you get the spark of just creativity, and you're like, oh, we can totally utilize that.
Yeah.
Same thing like if a girl comes in and she doesn't really have too much, because I've had girls come in and they're like, okay, well, I've got the black thong. I'm like, okay then. And we go through, and if they didn't have a plan too much during their style consult, then I'll be like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to grab this, 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 and this, and we're going to do this, 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 and this.
And are you deciding that? So you're kind of deciding that on the fly versus like, I think about it in the context of our conversation today. For example, I sent you an outline ahead of time, kind of breaking the fourth wall here, but I sent you an outline ahead of time just to kind of give you an idea of what direction the conversation would go. It gives you opportunity to prep. It gives us flow and structure in the conversation. Do you do that kind of thing with the client, or are you deciding there after they show up, after you review the wardrobe, all right, this is what we're going to do?
So just like you said earlier, you sent me the outline, but then you just said earlier before we started that that's not exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah, it's not meant to be robotic.
It's not meant to be robotic, exactly. I feel like I take my sessions the same exact way, where it's like I will send them an outline, because I'd send them actually a timeline of like prep and tips and all of that, but for me, for my purposes of prep, I'll have like a kind of an idea of what we're going to do from the style consult. I'll have an idea. It won't be set in stone, though, until day of, where they bring in their things, and then we'll either go on the fly, or we'll have that plan story-wise of what they bring in. But I always try and create a story with what they bring or what they don't bring, and we just utilize in studio.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've chosen the wardrobe. What's next step?
Yeah, then we could do hair and makeup, because that also depends on what they bring. Because if they bring something super red, then we don't want purple lipstick, or purple eyeshadow or things like that. So we kind of utilize that time afterwards of like we figure out what exactly we're wanting to shoot with, and then we'll go into hair and makeup and decide exactly what we're going to do. Because usually there's a basic hair and makeup tracked with these boudoir sessions, because unless they're wanting something super vintage or pinup, it's going to be more Victoria's Secret kind of bedhead curls and that light shadowy eye and either a nude or a red or maroon lip. That's usually what everyone's generally gravitating towards. They're like, just make me look pretty. And so we'll go through hair and makeup. This also gives a chance to chat with them more, to get to know them more. Probably 75% of my job in studio, dealing with clients is therapy and cheerleading and just being a friend or a shoulder to cry on, because we get to really know each other and really sometimes we open up some old wounds, definitely too.
Wow.
Deep, because we open up past insecurities. Because a lot of the time, it's not just, boudoir today especially, is not just about pretty pictures. It's about feeling confident about yourself and really loving yourself and your body and feeling that confidence to be able to show it off and feeling empowered and all of that. And sometimes you have a lot of insecurities holding you back from that. And so a lot of times trying to work through those, we get into some pretty deep topics. But that gives you the chance, that time beforehand to kind of, again, get to know each other, get comfortable with each other. It's also why I like to do the style consult in the studio as well. So that way they can see the studio. So that the first time they're there, it's not when they're going to get naked.
Right.
Because that's a little bit uncomfortable.
Just going,
just a little bit. Yeah. Just a little bit uncomfortable. But it's all about that, creating an environment that makes them feel comfortable enough to kind of shed that outer armor.
Yep. Emotionally,
emotionally
figuratively,
and
literally.
physically, quite literally.
So at that point, then
we go into the shooting.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get into the first look. Like I said earlier, so say a girl brings in that full lingerie look, and then she brings in, say, another bodysuit, or we pick a bodysuit from the studio client closet, and then she brings in also like a white button-up or a jersey, some kind of like almost a wild card. How I would do it storyline wise, shooting, I would shoot that luxe look first with the coiffed hair, the perfect lips, all of that jazz, because it's going to be hard to recreate that later.
Yeah.
After tumbling around and moving around all day. So we do that look first. And again, we go into the whole story, like we'll do that whole storyline of her taking off everything and getting into that. And then to kind of go into that more jersey or button-up look, then I treat that almost as the next morning.
Really?
So
Okay.
So it's kind of like the night before or to the next morning, to like
cool.
the day after.
Yep.
So we can do it that way.
It kind of help them get in the right mental space too?
Yeah, exactly. It gets them into the right mental space. And that's another thing about story, and about bringing storytelling into your photography. It helps them get into that space, into that headspace. Because with just posing, again, you get the dead eyes. They kind of go into their own brain and they kind of just, they get flat in their face, in their eyes. They have no emotion. Giving them an action, telling them a story, like this is what's happening now, it gets them more in the mood. It's the same thing as why like we have music going on and it's the atmosphere. It gets them into that headspace. So we'll put them, into the studio, into that full lingerie look, pare it down to the implied nudes, and then it's the next morning with that oversized button-up, because it's like that's the quintessential next morning look.
Right.
You've got that oversized button-up.
Yep.
But then we'll do that a whole more natural session, so then even though it's still telling a storyline, they still have like some good different looks as well. They can be a little bit more natural and a little bit more sexy. So that's what I do when girls want a little bit of both. Is I'll kind of point them towards this way or that way. We can also do it opposite ways. I'll still shoot it that way where it's more glam look first, but in album design, if they wanted to, instead of doing the darker look first into the more natural look of the day after, if they wanted to, we can also do it the opposite, where it goes from light to dark, where it's kind of like the day that morning and then her getting ready that evening.
Yep. Totally makes sense.
Yeah. It's also why I have a lot of like luxurious like actual gowns as well, because again we'll tell a story where she's coming in from a debonair evening out at a party or whatever, and then slowly getting undressed, and this is what she has underneath, all of that. So it tells a story.
Wow. Okay. So but you mentioned the album. Let's touch on that just briefly here before we finish up. You're telling a story with the photography and really in the succession of the photographs themselves. But you do have the ability to be able to customize the final presentation later. Do most of your clients get an album and or print as a final product?
That is, the albums are my most popular, honestly. My two most popular items are albums and then the metal wall art. Because I don't do canvas, I do metals. Metals are just perfect for boudoir. That behind me is not a metal, that's a print. I see you eyeing that. That's
I was looking, there's this
on
beautiful
the other
black
side.
and white portrait behind you. Yeah. Okay.
That's just a portrait. If I got a metal that size, that would probably bankrupt me. That's huge.
Yeah.
That is a huge one.
Probably a 30 by 40, maybe?
I think, or like a 48, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's huge. On the other side, though, is one of my metal prints.
Okay.
But yeah, no, albums, though, are probably the favorite. Because, again, they're like a big fairy tale storybook. I mean, my luxury albums, there's one right over there. Oh, I can go grab it real quick.
Okay, yes.
It's my baby. It's my 12 by 12. This is my favorite album.
Now, I have to ask, too, what, if you don't mind sharing, what brand album company you're using?
So I use the Boudoir album. Quite literally, it's called the Boudoir album.
Okay.
They are amazing, and they specialize in boudoir.
Well, and you literally have, is this the, what is this here that we're looking at?
So this is a little wrap that they put into all the different packaging, just a little extra added bonus of luxury.
Wow.
It's just like a little, it's this little embossed crushed velvet and lace kind of number.
Cloth, that covers up the album. That's beautiful.
Fancy. And then this is actually an ice cover with my Confident Caramel album, the leather.
So is that wow.
So that's acrylic, a layer of acrylic over a metal print.
Over the image, beautiful, beautiful image. And then that leather kind of binding, and then the back cover, I guess the back cover is that same material?
All embossed, it's all engraved and all of that.
That is gorgeous. Wow.
And it literally looks like a story, like the fairy tale books that you grew up with in all those like Disney movies where they'd open up that beautifully illuminated book.
Except for just the slightly edgier image on the cover.
It's a little bit of an edgier image on the cover. It's a little bit of a naked woman. But still, it looks it has that feel of that, just like that
You're right,
fairy
though.
tale.
Yeah,
It
kind of a
looks like
fantastical
fairy tale book.
feel to it. Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely kind of is reminiscent of just that fairy tale story kind of. And that's how I wanted to show off my pictures. I wanted to tell that story. And so, the albums are definitely the most popular because they utilize that a little bit more.
Yep. Beautiful. And we'll make sure to link to, you said it's called the Boudoir album.
The Boudoir album. That's the name of the company, yeah.
So for anybody who's curious, we'll link to that in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com as well. And it's unfortunate that you all can't see the beautiful work that she's showing me in the album as I'm talking here. But I really appreciate you making time to share your perspective, Tasha. I mean, it's fascinating to come in and actually get to see the working space here. And seriously, one of the most incredible beds that I've ever seen. And it's kind of a random statement to make, but like in the context of this conversation, it's pretty incredible, actually.
If you go to my Instagram, you'll be able to see it. It's probably one of the most prevalent ones on my newest pictures. You'll be able to see a lot of the different sides of this bed. And
if for those of you listening in, again, we'll link to this in the show notes. It's Wanderlust_boudoir, and it's wanderlustboudoirstudio.com is the website. But I'm actually going to pull this up here really quickly and just give you a point of reference. So it looks like we're seeing actually the image. I think it's here's another image that actually really showcases that idea of shooting through an object or objects. But May 27th, there's a client there that's photographed on that blue bed. It's amazing. We'll link to all of this in the show notes. For those of you who are curious, make sure that you take advantage of that resource. And Tasha, thank you so much for making time to share with all of our listeners.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.